this thing on? Good, good. Welcome back, everyone, to the Fantasy Network. I am Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I decided to take a little break from the review section and do my first ever tag here on BookTube, and I got this from Rid, my good friend, and I will link her channel down below. She tagged me, and I thought it was an interesting one, and it's one I wanted to do. So we're going to give it a shot, and if it goes well, I'll keep doing stuff like this because some of the tag videos are really good. Some of them aren't so good, but I think this is going to be a good one. I'm going to have my wonderful wife asking me the questions off screen. Try to get her on camera, but she doesn't think that my big head gives us enough room in the shot. Or she's just very shy. But either way, she'll be asking off camera, and then I will respond accordingly. All right, so let's hear. What's the first question? What's the first question of the tag?
What is your fantasy origin story?
Yes, my fantasy origin story. I had no idea what this meant. I had to watch Rid's video, and she talked about the inheritance cycle, or whatever the Aragon series is. I always forget what it's referenced as. But my fantasy origin story is that's pretty cliche. I think most people feel this way, and it's with The Lord of the Rings. I saw the movies, and I wanted more immediately after Fellowship, and my dad, we walked into a Walden bookstore, and he picked me up the books, and my God, they were dense. They were very dense. It was one of the thick volumes, I believe, where I had all three books in one, and I remember just being utterly confused, but struggling my way through it, and I kind of felt defeated because I didn't understand a lot of what was going on, and it wasn't as thrilling and as exciting as a blockbuster movie, but it always resonated with me, the opening scenes in the Shire of Fellowship of the Ring and the way Gandalf still had presence in the text. And I think I was maybe 10 or 11 at that time. But I knew then I was probably going to be a fantasy head. And then I would say a little bit later, to get me more into adult fantasy and back into the genre, it was A Song of Ice and Fire. But truly my origin begins with Tolkien and Fellowship of the Ring, like so many others. So probably not the most interesting answer or most unique answer, but it's the truth.
If you could be the hero of a fantasy novel, who would be the author? And what's one trope you'd insist in being in the story?
Okay, so the trope one's easy. I'm actually going to answer that first. My wouldn't be so much a character trope of like Chosen One or anything like that. I would just want the trope of like the magical sword, because who doesn't want a magical sword? So I would go with that trope if that's okay with everyone. And who would write my story? Ooh, you know, a lot of my favorite authors are pretty brutal to their protagonist. I'm assuming I'd be the protagonist, of course, because it says hero. It definitely would not be Joe Abercrombie or George R.R. Martin. Not a chance. Even Tad Williams is pretty brutal. I hear Robin Hobb is brutal. This is actually like a pretty cool question. And I think I would probably pick Brandon Sanderson, because I think even though they go through a lot of turmoil like Kaladin, right? There's still a lot of redeeming qualities to these characters, and they always end up growing. And most of them are just really good people with some badass traits. So I'm actually going to pick Brandon Sanderson if I had to pick one author to write my story as protagonist, because I don't necessarily, even though I love grimdark, I don't necessarily want to live in those worlds, and I don't want to have to go through that amount of trauma.
What is a fantasy book you've read this year that you want more people to read?
Well, the default answer here, so we're in 2021, so I've only read really 2 books. I shouldn't say 2 books. I've read, I think, 3 books, but only 2 different authors. So I'm gonna actually cheat a little bit. I'm gonna go back into 2020. It's actually the Dagger and Coin series, and I really struggle because I thought my review of the first book in that series was really good, and that's Dragon's Path, which would be the book I would say that more people should read. And while I think I did an okay job for people who are interested in the series, I don't think I did a great job of selling the idea of epic fantasy that does have war, but it's decided at, you know, the politics table through tariffs and propaganda. I don't think I did a great job of selling it to people who aren't already interested in the book, and it really bothers me because I think Daniel Abraham did something really special with the Dagger and the Coin, and some of the comments that I've received from users have been just really insightful, and people who take the time to get into that series, I think, come away with a lot of things to think about that are really easy to chew on and digest, and some of the best characters in all of fantasy. I have possibly the best antagonist that I've read in fantasy is in that series. So even though it technically isn't in the 2021 year, I would definitely say The Dagger and the Coin. And I would like maybe in the future to do Why You Should Read and maybe give another crack at trying to get more people to read this. Because when you say, oh, it's fantasy from the financial and propaganda and political side of things, people kind of zone out. And that's fair. Isn't for everyone per se, and it's not the fastest series, but I think a lot of people like The Expanse, and at face value in book one, it's not exactly, Battlestar Galactica, but it ends up being something very special, and that's the same case with Daniel Abraham's other work here in The Dagger and the Coin. All right, give it to me. What's the next one?
What is your favorite fantasy subgenre? What subgenre have you not read much from?
This one's pretty easy. If you've been watching the channel, you already know. If you haven't, you're about to find out. It's grimdark. It's always going to be grimdark. There's something about not feeling comfortable when I read that I really like, and I always feel like the stakes in grimdark tend to be a little bit higher, and a lot of the character work is very in-depth, and there's multiple layers to it, and also how you balance out what grimdark is. Joe Abercrombie does a phenomenal job with subtle humor and kind of gives you breaks in between all of the treachery and the deceit. That's important, and controlling the tone in a grimdark story, I think, takes some pretty masterful nimbling around, and it has to be treated with extreme care to not just be completely nihilistic or depressing. Joe Abercrombie has done an amazing job with that, so obviously it's grimdark. If there's one I haven't read a ton of, and I'd like to do more, is urban fantasy, without a doubt. I'd like to read the Dresden Files coming up. If I can get into that to this year, that'd be great. It's a big commitment because I'm one of those people. I'm a serial reader. I usually read straight through something, and there's a lot of Dresden books to do that with. So Ninth House would be, I think, considered urban fantasy, and I really enjoyed it, and it's something that I would like to get more into as I progress as a reader.
Who is one of your auto-buy fantasy authors?
Auto-buy. So I just mentioned him, but it's going to be Joe Abercrombie. I have actually said here on the channel in my The Trouble with Peace review, for my dollar, there's no one that gives me more out of it than Joe Abercrombie when it comes to just what I expect and what I get and what he puts down on paper. I tend to eat up. So without a doubt, auto-buy, insta-buy, day one purchase, always going to be Joe Abercrombie.
How do you typically find recommendations?
BookTube. Go figure, right? I definitely watch less BookTube than I used to, and a lot of times it's just seeing what my friends here on BookTube are up to. I definitely also like to check out Goodreads. I mean, the person who's influenced me the most with what I read, without a shadow of a doubt, is Patrick, and you can check out Patrick Reads here on YouTube. He's the best reviewer on Goodreads, in my opinion, and he has been pretty solid, like 99% match for me. There are some things that he hasn't recommended I've read that I love, but when he gives me a recommendation, I truly trust that. And I would say also I have a friend from jiu-jitsu named Chris who's very well read. He's read hundreds and hundreds of books. He would be a gem to have on the channel someday to talk, because he gives me insights on things that I never had thought about, and also happens to be really well versed and have a couple degrees in writing and English, and just brings a different perspective, especially from what people are doing well and what they're not doing well as authors. It always makes me reconsider my take. I am very positive. If you watch the channel, I like enjoying stuff, and I generally will overlook some things. Also, when you read a lot of books, it's kind of hard to like dig in and give a super in-depth review, but I always try to do my due diligence. But I always find that my friend Chris does an amazing job of taking that extra layer off and really diving in. And it helps me be a better reviewer for being friends with him, and I always love his recommendations.
What's an upcoming fantasy release you're excited for?
Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. Yeah, we could just go to the next one. That's it. That's definitely number one. Runner-up is the final book in The Last King of Ostenard by Tad Williams. I just finished Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Really looking forward to that, but especially because it's coming out a little bit sooner, and it's also John Gwynne's first released novel outside of the Banished Lands, which we saw with Faithful and the Fallen, of Blood and Bone. Norse-inspired fantasy. There's a dragon on the cover and a little dude. I mean, Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne is by far my most anticipated release. I cannot wait.
What is one misconception about fantasy that you'd like to lay to rest?
That's a good one. You know, I think this is going to go beyond fantasy, and it's really just reading fiction in general. And it's something that really kind of teased me off, is I feel like people think that reading fantasy, or you could substitute fiction, I'll just say fantasy. Reading fantasy is a waste of time. I don't feel that at all. If you can read, Lord of the Rings, or you go through the Wheel of Time, or any of these books, and you come out not learning something, or at least having thought-provoking internal dialogue with yourself, I think you've really done a disservice to the author and to yourself. I think that there is a lot of room to grow as a person reading fantasy, and too many people look at it as a waste of time, or why would you do that, or even some would consider it childish. And I just think that those people are pretty limited, and it's something that I've fought very hard for to stand up to when I hear it. I feel like it is my job to be an ambassador of not only fantasy and fiction, but reading, and reading what you want. And that's why you won't see me really put up much of a fight when people have a favorite series that I don't click with necessarily. Because the fact of the matter is that they're reading fantasy and they're just reading in general. And I think that's good. I know I have grown as a person, not only from interacting with the community of reading specifically fantasy, but also the books that I have read. There are some pieces of writing that I will take with me for the rest of my life, and in very big, important, monumental moments in my life, I will think back on, and they will help me get through or really reinforce something that I'm going through. And fantasy has been an outlet not only to a little bit of escapism, but also really affects me internally. And I think that a lot of other people probably feel that way too. So if there's anything I could say that I misconception or whatever, is that it would be a waste of time to read anything, whether it be fiction or fantasy, sci-fi. It's your time and you get to spend it how you want. And I do think you can grow as a person with that.
If someone had never read a fantasy before and asked you to recommend the first 3 books that come to mind as places to start, what would those recommendations be?
So this is actually my favorite question, this tag. And the reason why is because, I'm an evangelist for fantasy. I have a lot of friends that aren't necessarily readers. I suggested that my wife here read Ninth House, and she is not a, typical fantasy reader. And it has led her to read Ninth House, and she loved it. And there are some other books that I've recommended to non-fantasy readers, not just non-fantasy readers, non-readers. I have a friend that I don't think he had read a fiction book since high school, if that. I don't even know if he did his English homework back in the day. So I do have 3 answers, and they're all books that I've recommended to non-readers that have got them into a gateway of fantasy, and they've continued on in the fantasy genre because of them. So one is obvious, like I said about my wife here, Ninth House. Ninth House is a very different kind of fantasy story, and I think it has vibes of other stories that people really enjoy, like Harry Potter. Obviously, it's totally different, but it has a little bit of that vibe to me, and she agreed when she read it. And the other 2, which I recommended to my other friends, would be Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, because I think it's just a completely different setting than medieval fantasy and being African-inspired, and it's a breakneck pace. It is absolutely intense. Every single page turning and all the training scenes. While some people might find them taxing, I think a lot of casual readers or new people to the genre really enjoy it. And he loved Rage of Dragons. And then now he's still reading fantasy, folks. So it was a huge success. And then the third is interesting because I think some people will hear this and go, well, why would you ever recommend that for a first-time reader? But I have, and it's worked, and they've continued on in that series, and then they've also read other fantasy novels. And that's an oldie but a goodie, folks. It's a classic. It is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, book 1 of the Wheel of Time. I think that series has a formula that encourages binge reading and makes you want to know what's coming next. And especially the first 2 books have some of the best endings, in my opinion, in fantasy. And they have translated very well to new readers for me that I've recommended to. And it's led them to read more fantasy. And number 10 is actually just to shout out a creator. And I'm going to say Christian from Lost in Discovery is absolutely my shout out. Newer to YouTube, I think maybe even newer to me, but has had great success. And that's because Lost in Discovery Christian is making some of the most quality content on BookTube, in my opinion. He has excellent recaps and deep dives for Stormlight Archive. He's very big into the Cosmere. And now I got him in the First Law. And if you've watched the channel, you know how much I love First Law. Me and Christian are probably going to be doing some content together here in the near future, talking about First Law. He just wrapped up the trilogy, and I just kind of want to get his thoughts and maybe talk about some of the finer characters in that universe, because there are just so many. But Lost in Discovery, Christian, he's just a phenomenal guy, and on top of that, a very good content creator that I look up to and really use him for a lot of encouragement and motivation to make my channel better. Can't wait to collaborate with him in the future. I'm not going to tag anybody in this. If you want to do this, go ahead. But I don't know who's already done this because I'm so new to these tagging videos. And I don't know who's done it and who hasn't. I try to watch all the videos out there, but I can't see them all. So if you haven't done this and you want to do it, feel free to tag yourself and let me know down in the comments if you're going to do it. Is there any other questions that you would like to hear me answer to get to know me a little bit better? I think it's fun to describe myself, not just telling you guys facts, but to use fantasy books as a way of kind of exposing a little bit more of myself to you all, which is pretty neat. So down in the comments, let me know. You can answer these questions too if you're just a watcher. Get down in there and let me know exactly what your answers are to these questions. And if you like this video and want to see more like it, or you want to be around for some really cool reviews coming up in the future and some First Law content, hopefully with Lost and Discovery also in the future, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. And remember, until next time, be good, be safe, and always keep turning the page.